Joining us right now, he is an expert on all of these things. Is Stephen Yates at Yates Comms, and you can see him over at the American First they have their own Twitter account, but it's American First Policy Institute. Follow him at Yates Comms, and he also had advised during the Bush administration, former VP Dick Cheney. He joins us now. So, Stephen, always good to see you. I know you're very busy. We were talking on break about your amazing background and how you just need the big long table, which
That's
was
right.
hysterical. I wanted to get your thoughts on this insane empowerment of propping up Maduro, getting oil from Venezuela, going to allowing Iran to I guess grow with their nuclear capacity. I guess that's if I accept the presupposition that they ever stopped in the first place, which I don't think anybody really believes that. But it just feels like if you wanted to take steps to minimize America's influence, destabilize not just our national security but that of our European allies, you would take every single step that this administration is doing. So it seems, what's going on here? What's the issue?
Well, I mean, I thought that 2 terms of Obama was very, very damaging to America's standing in the world, American competitiveness, the structure of our economy. And it turns out just over a year of Joe Biden is empowering much of the world to wreck the American way of life. I mean, if you just look at the price of gas alone, people were just joking here this morning. Congratulations, the COVID restrictions are being lifted so that you can now go and do the activities you no longer are able to afford.
Right.
And so, I mean, everything from the price of goods, the supply of goods, but this dirty play on oil, while we won't exploit our own resources, we're going to enrich and empower this axis that hates America and also, as a benefit to themselves, will insulate themselves from future sanctions. I mean, if they have a separate financing system and they have a separate oil economy that's out there running, what are we supposed to do to impose brilliant new sanctions that our negotiators will bring up if there's a conflict at some point? So it's absolutely outrageous that the negotiations on Iran have been racing ahead largely out of the spotlight. Maybe that's why the spotlight was so white hot on the Ukraine, so that there would be less scrutiny on what is a clearly anti-American deal with Iran.
Yeah, it does. And I'm just shocked that this is a priority for this administration to pursue, considering everything that's going on. I have so much that I want to talk to you about. We're talking with Stephen Yates at Yates Comms. One thing that I caught, and I'm pulling this up here right now, looking a little bit at Russia now going from Joe Biden going hat in hand, begging these tyrants. I think we've talked a little bit about, very briefly, what the United States should be doing in terms of playing up any kind of friction between China and Russia. And I saw from it's a state publication, a state-run publication from, and bear with me because we saw it on Twitter just a little earlier and I had made mention of it. But one of the Russian-owned and controlled papers had put out this list of countries that they said were unfriendly to Russia. And interestingly, Stephen, they listed on this Taiwan. So and we know that it's a state-owned entity. They're not going to put anything out there that the Kremlin didn't approve of. So is that Russia recognizing Taiwan as its own sovereign country?
I think that's what their foreign ministry might qualify as an oopsie. And so they admitted out loud. They absolutely hate Taiwan because the people of Taiwan and their government are very openly standing with the people of Ukraine. Which has been an economic partner of some import, but also a lot of new Europe, Eastern Europe, that came out from under the Iron Curtain, recognized very much the dichotomy between China's communist system and the democracy and technological miracle that was happening on Taiwan. So it's interesting that their hatred of all things that are Ukraine allows them to say this, but for sure, there are heads exploding in China's foreign ministry and many angry letters are being drafted to force them to correct their speech, just like they forced the Marriott Corporation and Delta Airlines and others to correct their accidental oopsie by saying, which country do you have in mind to travel to today? And if you said Taiwan, well, no, you can't pick that because it's not a country, says the PRC. So if they're going after airlines and hotels, you got to believe they're going to be going after the Russians on this. But overall, there's still a marriage of convenience, an axis of nuisance at the very least, in trying to disaggregate and confuse our alliances, to dispirit the American people and anyone who wants to stand with us.
And speaking of that, the alliances, so we have Visa and MasterCard, they withdrew their services. That's just pushing Russia to do further business with China. And then meanwhile, do we know what is actually happening with the situation with jets from Poland? Because I have seen such back and forth reporting on this. I don't know what's real and what isn't. They had one of the foreign ministers with Poland, they had tweeted from his official account saying this is misinformation or this is fake news. We're not sending jets to Ukraine. But then apparently Blinken's like, oh yeah, we are. Yeah, we're helping out Poland with that. Well, what's happened? What's the truth? And why does no one seem to be on the same page?
Congratulations to the comms first administration for getting their comms straight with an ally that's on the front lines. You'd think that if the White House and the Biden administration were all about doing this, they would have talked with Poland about it and they'd be in sync. But we are definitely in the fog of information war. I think it's very important for everyone not to take at face value things that we're hearing in a 24 or 48 hour news cycle or Twitter cycle or whatever else, because there's a lot of shade being thrown in a lot of different directions for a lot of different agendas. But I think we're dealing with, I think, the danger of trying to fix a problem with Russia, Ukraine, and not thinking through what are the broader implications of this. What happens if we create this bipolar world again, and then there's a problem in the Middle East, and the people we want to cooperate with in the Middle East have a foot in both shores. We can't take the you're with us or against us kind of mentality on that. The China model, as much as you and I are clear about it, and I think a lot of Americans are clear about it, our supply chains and our markets are not as clear yet. And so work needs to be done before we can do things like this. And so I think there's a lot of thinking through that needs to happen with whether you're having a no-fly zone or a commercial no-fly zone or cutting off banking and other kinds of things. I'm all for it, putting the screws to the bad guys. But we have to think through, how is this actually going to work? And is it going to create problems with what I consider to be a bigger threat related to China or the nuclear threat with Iran?
Yeah, we're talking with Stephen Yates, a foreign policy expert, and he is with the America First Policy Institute, and he's an expert on really all these issues. How do you, because I know there was a phone call over the weekend between lawmakers and Zelensky, and he was begging for air coverage, restricted airspace. How is that ask granted without NATO involvement? Meaning, how do you actually create a no-fly zone over Ukraine without NATO doing it?
Well, this is one of the biggest contradictions in what the American position has ended up being. And I think it would have been something that was more defensible if it had been announced much earlier and a lot of preparation had been done for it. But because the administration and Europe dithered until after invasion, we're stuck in this cul-de-sac, it seems. But the contradiction inherently says we're standing with the Ukrainian people, except we're not actually going to defend them. We're going to defend NATO. And the reason we can't send material into Ukraine, again, leaving aside whether we should or shouldn't, but the reason we're being told we can't do this is because it would put us into direct conflict with Russia, and we're not going to have a shooting war with Russia, and they're a nuclear power, and so we can't do that. Well, okay, if you take that rationale at face value, how then are you going to respond if a NATO country becomes involved? Because then a treaty obligation is engaged, and the entire system of alliances is called into question if you don't act. And Russia's still a nuclear power. You still don't want a shooting war with them. And by the way, when you tell a bad guy, I really don't want to fight, what does that encourage them to actually do? Is to walk right up to that line and put a toe right over it. Right. And so I think that we're actually in a terrible position when it comes to credibility in Europe, credibility with NATO. And I don't see how we can do a lot of these things through Poland and other parts of Europe without admitting we're in this soup. And whether we should or shouldn't be in the soup is something we should have been debating and preparing for before it broke out.
Is the EU or even the United Nations, are they able to take I mean, make the UN worth something. I mean, what do? They have a Security Council that Russia sits on and has veto power over.
Right.
Are they able to do any? Can they take point on something for once other than their peacekeeping stuff? Are they able to do this?
Well, in theory, they are, but I think we've talked about this before. I think the UN is basically a Simpsons episode waiting to be written. It's
I
not
agree.
really going to do anything. It's just there for verbal farce for everyone to kind of witness. Europe should take care of Europe. The European Union could do more. And unlike what a lot of people want to say, an America First approach to this is not isolationism, but it's also not enabling our very capable allies to come up short on what they should be doing for themselves. They should be doing the majority of the effort, and we should be playing a supporting cast role when it comes to material and risk. And that's dangerous, and unfortunately, people are suffering right now. But I think we have to hold firm to that because we can't afford to overinvest in this theater while Europe kind of coasts along with us, because we have problems in the Middle East, we have problems in Asia, but we have problems here at home.
Yeah.
We have to develop our own energy. We have to build up our own manufacturing. We have to take care of American families. And so we can't afford to be doing all this for the Ukrainian people. As much as I admire the courage of their leader, I don't begrudge him for making the ask. I begrudge our leaders for pretending like this is the only option we have at this point.
You make a really good point, because we were yelled at and we were trash talked during the Trump administration when he demanded that they just meet the bare minimum requirements for GDP of defense spending for NATO. And now we're yelled at if we're too involved. We're yelled at if we're not involved. And if people think that lives are at stake now, what do they think is going to happen with World War III? What do they think is going to happen with the number of lives that would be lost then? You're talking about taking something that is in one area, geopolitical conflict, and maximizing it to include the entire world. I don't know. You make some really good points. Stephen Yates at Yates Comms. Always appreciate your thoughts on this, and you're so reasoned, and you have a way of just chilling everybody out. Before I let you go, are we going to be in World War III? Like, should everybody cancel their summer plans and keep like gas reserves and take money out of the bank? Where are we at?
Oh, my wife and Michelle and I have big plans for the summer, so I am vetoing World War III.
Okay, there you go.
So let it be written, so let it be done. But we're in dangerous times, and if we had leaders, we would be okay. Problem is, we don't have leaders right now, and so I worry a great deal about whether the rest of the world can step into this void and carry us through.
I still feel scared, Kane. I feel okay. Stephen Yates, always a pleasure to see you, my friend. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week. Appreciate you.
Thank you.